All right, everyone. Welcome to LaunchPad.
Chris, that was amazing. Well done.
There was only a couple times where my arm had to go in there to do something.
I like that it just helps stir up the shadow of doubt on whether or not that was a screensaver. Is that real? Anything to create a little illusion. Chris, you are still spotlit.
Oh, let me unspotlight myself. Happy Friday, everyone. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
All right. Typically, we give everyone a couple extra minutes to file in here. I know we have a packed session this month, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you everybody for joining. I know Friday afternoon, depending on where you are on Cinco de Mayo weekend, might be a tall order, so I appreciate everyone finding the time to join us. We have a very exciting session. Before we get into the details, for everyone that hasn't joined one of our LaunchPad Mac Admin meetups before, we do this monthly. We typically try to do noon Mountain Time on the first Friday of every month, and we'll do the gravity times, where we keep your Apple news and rumors down to earth and try and provide you with anything fun, new, exciting, challenging that's happened recently in the last month in terms of patch updates, updates to Jamf, Apple updates. And then we'll do another keynote where we will go over some sort of interesting topic as dubbed by our engineers, but we are always looking for suggestions on different topics that we could cover, or even guest speakers. Speaking of guest speakers, this month we will be joined by Kevin White of MacJitsu, who developed S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N, a superscript that our very own Chad Lawson will be covering and doing a Q&A with Kevin. Kevin, we are very excited to have you join us for this month. I know you're a bit of a Jamf superstar. Most people, I think, in the Jamf community are at least familiar with you. So very exciting to have you on this. Thank you so much. And Chad, if you've ever been on any of our presentations before, Chad Lawson is a recurring speaker who does a fantastic job. So always excited to have Chad leading the charge. First things first, we will go through the gravity times, bringing your Apple news and rumors down to earth, shared by Rocket Man leader, lead engineer, owner, founder, Chris Shazi.
All right, and PR is going to have a talk with you, Eric, because it's now the LaunchPad times.
Yeah, when we rebrand so often, sometimes I get mixed up. And gravity times is still near and dear to my heart because, I mean, bringing Apple news and rumors down to earth, come on.
It's also a name you came up with. It is a great name,
yeah.
though. All right. To kick things off, we're going to do something a little bit different this month. Caleb, are you able to get the poll working? Perfect. Yep. So we have, a very large and dedicated group of individuals of Jamf engineers, and we just wanted to do a quick poll to see how much years of Jamf experience everyone has. And I won't tell you why yet, but it's really important that everyone answers. So go ahead in the poll that just popped up. Go ahead and answer how many years of Jamf experience you have. I will do that before moving forward. We're going to keep this up for a little bit so we get time for everyone to answer. So.
Chris, are you going to start humming the girl? Are you going to start humming the girl from Ipanema or something so we have a little bit of hold music while people answer?
Chad, we all know that that's your job.
That is my job, and yet I am willing to defer it. Delegate, one might say.
Young in love.
Okay. I will say for sure, nobody wants to you don't coordinate singing on Zoom. It never goes well, even for birthdays.
So give a couple seconds to answer that question. You shouldn't need to think too hard. Just enter a number in. Moving forward, though, I want to talk through Apple updates and Jamf updates in the last month. So Apple has had two exciting releases, which are the rapid security responses. And that's the A after the 16.4.1 and 13.3.1. So let's talk about what we learned from those. First off, like I said, this is a rapid security response. So I want to see how everyone's experience was with this update. I know I was reading online that people were having problems in the first 24 hours of just installing the update. But has anyone seen this update cause any issues or confusions for their users? Or was it pretty seamless? Brett said that users reported random reboots. A lot of confusion. And anyone feel free to speak up if you want to. You can keep throwing it in the chat too if you want. So a lot of varying responses from everyone. Some people said it was super seamless and easy. Others had some issues with different things. Like with all the rapid security responses I've seen so far, the promise of not restarting your computer seems to not be a thing. It almost always seems to require some type of reboot. Hopefully in the future, we'll start to see some of these security responses without a reboot. Another thing I wanted to note that I thought was interesting about these two is there are no release notes. So looked online, couldn't find anything except it's a rapid security response. So maybe we'll see more of that from Apple. Anytime there's a security response, they're going to be like, hey, we're just not even going to tell you why we did this. We're just going to deploy this update to everyone. If anyone knows what this update was for, feel free to speak up or throw it in the chat. Are there any additional Apple updates in the last month or two that I may have missed? Okay. So moving on, we're going to talk about some Jamf updates. So last month we were on 10.45 and now we are on 10.46. So what's new with this update? One of the most interesting things that I saw is Jamf now has a lapse option. If you don't know what that means, that's essentially a rotating backdoor admin account. I haven't tested this yet. Next month, I'd love to be able to give an update on how this functions. One of the things I saw, though, in their documentation is that it does not reset the file vault password. So if you're trying to use this as an account to be able to log into computers, if they're file vault encrypted, might not work too well because most of the time users aren't logging out of their accounts, they're restarting their computers. So if you want to use that as a way to log into the computer, probably not going to work. We do have a tool that does work with the file vault password. So there are other tools out there as well that do a similar thing. So just kind of interesting. Another thing to note too is this is only available via the API, so you can't do it with the GUI yet. So they say in the release notes that the GUI version is coming soon. Has anyone been able to experiment with this yet? All right, we'll give you some more news on this exciting feature next month. Another thing I saw is there's a VPP facelift. So inside of volume purchasing, you're now going to be able to sort and filter your VPP locations. If you only have a couple locations, this probably isn't a big deal. If you have hundreds of locations, this is probably pretty cool just to be able to figure out where the locations are. Another thing I wanted to note, this was kind of a smaller thing in the release notes, but the make policy available offline is getting deprecated soon. They have a way to turn it off now in the Jamf portal. Don't know when that will be deprecated, but it will be deprecated soon. It's kind of surprising, and also a little bit not surprising at the same time, because I feel like this feature has been something that hasn't really worked as I've expected in the past with a lot of stuff. Like if you don't have connection to Jamf, it seems to not, like if anything gets broken with the Jamf communication or the Jamf token, make available offline doesn't really work. I've noticed this when I tried creating a self-healing script that people could run from self-service. And if it's not communicating with Jamf, it'll not be able to run that. There's also some additional inventory attributes, operating system build version, operating system rapid security response, and passcode compliance for iOS. And this is all part of the declarative device management improvements that are kind of happening in the back end. And just take a look at what that looks like. This is the first time I've actually been able to see something in these two inventory slots, so I wanted to show it. So with this last rapid security response release, we get a little A, just noting that's the rapid security response. I haven't seen anything in that operating system supplemental build version yet, though. I don't know if anyone's seen that or understand like what exactly that's for. All right, I will move on then. Get more information about that in the future. And some other smaller updates I wanted to note. The expiration notification for Jamf Pro built-in certificate authority has been changed from 90 days to 360 days. I don't think we're using that in any of our environments because we're this is the Jamf built-in certificate authority. So I don't know what essentially that'll be fixing. But if anyone's having any issues with that or have a situation where that might fix something, let us know. There's also a couple macOS and iOS configuration profile changes. For macOS, it's the browser filter, the socket filter, and the network filter. And for iOS, it's the filter WebKit traffic. And then there's another one, but I can't get to my presenter notes. Oh, filter socket traffic. And then there's also a return to login button for SSO sessions after you log in with SSO to either Jamf Pro or like user initiated enrollment or something like that. Any questions or comments on these? Cool. Trying to keep up with the chat, but it's scrolled past and I always lose my mouse. Here we go. Oh, nice. Someone answered my question about the operating system supplemental build version. So I'm glad that someone was able to pull that up and see what it is. That makes sense too. All right. And any additional Jamf updates that we may have missed? Feel free to throw it in the comments or speak up if you have anything you want to discuss. Perfect. Moving on. One thing before we move on, Caleb, how many people have we gotten to respond to the survey?
We're at 94 so far.
Okay. That seems pretty good. We're about to run a report. So if you haven't answered yet, please answer. But before we do, I want to talk through some LaunchPad updates. So I want to show, and I showed this last month, but I did want to show people that didn't join last month, the new website that we have, which goes over our schedule, our next month's topic, shows future events happening. And then also a call for session proposals. So if you want to speak at one of these sessions, go ahead and submit a proposal. And then we also have not only our YouTube channel and our blog, but we also have a podcast. So we have a new website, we have a new podcast, and then we've also switched. We used to have our own Slack channel, and we've since switched to having we had our own Slack workspace, which was fun to manage, but now we've switched to a Mac admin Slack channel. So if you haven't joined that yet, make sure you join it. It's hashtag LaunchPad is the channel name. And Caleb, have you put together the report yet?
Unfortunately not. I'm having trouble getting to the download.
Okay.
Eric, are you able to download since you're a part of since you're the host or the founded the meeting?
Yep, I've got the report here.
Yeah, can you just open that up in a spreadsheet and do a quick addition of all of them, and then also see what the top answer was?
Yes.
Cool. While they're doing that, I will move forward.
I can confirm that the top answer is currently 20 years.
Wow. So who was 20 years? If you don't mind sharing, we have a prize for them. I guess we didn't collect anyone's names, so or can you see the name on there, Eric?
I cannot.
Okay. So if anyone wants to speak up and let us know who has 20 years of experience, you can throw it in the chat. Or you can speak up if you'd like. We got a little prize for you. Oh, yeah. And as Kevin mentioned, I probably should have put some of the big news in here, which is there is a new CEO of Jamf, which is pretty exciting. But I also loved Dean, so it's a little bit bittersweet.
Kevin, was that you putting up your hand because you're the one with the 20 years?
Sorry, I had to unmute. No, I just answered yes. You said 3 characters, so that's what I did.
And as we're kind of going through this, if anyone has any feature requests, we've got a lot of people on this call, so a lot of people that can vote those feature requests. So throw them in the chat. I see that Keith threw one in there. That would be amazing. Make inventory attributes available as script attributes. So take a look at that and upvote it if you'd like. Eric, were you able to do a sum of all of the numbers?
I am sorting through some pretty broken data here, so I will chime in when I have that ironed out. It is not pretty.
Of course, people answered in things other than numbers. I knew we should have went with multiple choice.
This is why you sanitize your inputs.
Yeah. We tried. Zoom doesn't allow us to.
Little Bobby tables.
Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
So right, the years of RuneScape experience is going to make this easy for me to click through.
Cool. In the meantime, we can get started with the presentation and share the results at the end of the meeting. Give Eric a little more time to sort that. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Chad.
Now I had trouble coming off of mute. All right, whoever is, can I get Kevin and myself spotlighted, please? Apparently I am not a host at the moment. Well, it says I'm a co-host, but it wasn't letting me.
I assume everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Right now, I'm only seeing me.
I just made you a host.
I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and
I see you.
right, but if you could also, there we go.
That's nice. That looks
Perfect.
good.
All right.
Great
And with that, the little intro I put together. So Kevin and I have run into each other on and off again since like 2010. So we've been running in the same circles for quite some time. But I wanted to say that, one of the challenges, at least in my world, and I know for a lot of us, one of the greatest challenges has been trying to keep our Macs up to date. And in the past, we had that nice little Jamf policy action with the, you could just either tell all the computers to update, or you could even script software update directly. But with all the different changes we've had in chip architecture, changes to the OS, the move to MDM driven update workflows, there hasn't been one right way to do it until now. We are joined today by Kevin White, the creator of S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N, and I had to write down, I have to scan in my notes so I can read the software update policy enforcement with recursive messaging and notification. Now, Kevin put into the chat that there's already a new release out, but when I wrote these notes last week, it was at a 7,556 line bash script that lives at the heart of a software update workflow. So please help me welcome Kevin White. All right,
Hey,
Kevin,
everyone.
as I mentioned, you and I have been been in the same sphere. I forgot my one intro I wanted to put in there. Kevin has also literally written the book on Mac administration. How many of the different publications for Apple? There they are. I had
For the audio, I am pointing to the bookshelf behind me.
with
only
all of
one
those
level
nice
of
little pretty
bookshelf.
Apple logos. Yes. Well, only one level, but I mean, they don't know how wide that bookshelf is.
And some of
That
those
could
are
even-
translations, like into other
really?
languages. Yeah.
What's your favorite language translation you have on
I
there?
think there's a Russian one back there, which is crazy.
That would be crazy.
Yeah. I don't understand.
I know you. Well, but you don't have to. I mean, yeah, I was going to say you don't have to. They're just there for the glory and the treasure.
Mhm.
I don't think I have anything that currently has my name on it. I co-authored one of the deployment books back in the day for 10.9 or something like that, but that was about it. But for those people here who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself as far as how long have you been around Apple and Jamf, although I just teased some of that.
Well, I actually, I've been around Apple and Jamf my entire professional career. I actually at one point worked at Apple, then left Apple to go out on my own. I have actually technically been on my own since I left Apple, but I am primarily a Jamf integrator partner, and that's where I make my money now that I definitely don't write books anymore. And that's basically what I do is I do consulting primarily for Jamf. I have a couple customers here and there, but most of my work is directly for Jamf as a partner service provider.
You were one of the first waves of Jamf partners, weren't you?
Yeah, I was actually, I had to look at my emails because that question, the poll earlier, I was like, when was my first email? 2008 I was one of the first partner providers because at the time I was an Apple Services partner provider, whatever we were called back then. And Jamf was wanting to obviously grow their organization, and as a services, us having contracts, people like us is a good way to do that without actually having to hire people, right?
Right.
And also it gives us, the freedom to work sort of our own schedule and not have to go to meetings. It's a big deal. Not being told by your boss what you need to do next. It's good stuff.
I'll have to pick your brain later and find out when exactly you worked at Apple. I'm now starting to wonder if maybe we overlapped, although I know we wouldn't have been in the same building.
It was before the books. So it was like 2006, 7, 8.
Oh, okay.
I was just there for short. I was only there for like 2 years.
But same for me. I think it was more like 18 months. I was on the build engineering team from 10.0 to 10.2. I got brought in because they were, with the move to OS 10, they needed people with the Unix experience. So that was the beginning of. It was funny that until recently I was telling people, I'm pretty much cross-platform, and then I realized 23 years of being Mac only, I got to quit saying that. I think at this point it's time to admit it. So with S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N, I mean, I was lucky to come and see your presentation at JNUC, and that was actually my first introduction to S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N. But I was taking a look at the GitHub repo and going back through some of the commits and seeing the progress on this. But what was They say mother's necessity, or the what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. So, what to create a several thousand line shell script? What was that pain point? That final point where you couldn't take it any longer and decided to start scripting something like this?
Sure. Well, just to start off, as the creator of it, you can just call it Super. Just
Yeah.
straight up, like that's the command, that's the name of it. That name actually is an acronym because the original customer, who I was as a professional services vendor, I was helping with the customer, and this customer wanted me to help them solve that problem for their organization. And this is an organization that loves big projects that have acronyms. So it was just, basically a process of elimination to come up with a good acronym. And that one just sort of, came out as like, oh, that's the winner. Obviously, we can call it Superman or Super or whatever. And so that's the genesis of the name. But totally call it Super. It's way less, syllables. And I guess the thing is, for years I was burdened with a project where I was fixing Apple's lack of doing something right, and that's why I wrote books. Right. And so I felt like, I don't have a burden fixing Apple's problems right now. So maybe I should create this project for myself to try to
Find
fix
a
stuff that
problem to
Apple
fix
won't
it.
get
Yeah.
right and give myself headaches about it. And it's like your home. You always have homework. Like it's never right because somebody's going to find a bug, or Apple will introduce a bug, or Jamf will introduce a bug, and you're like, oh well, now I've got to add another 1,000 lines of code to work around that. And yeah, everybody here gets it. The Apple software update process is a mess. It's not, even when it's working, is a bad user experience. It's that simple. Even when it works, even if it wasn't unreliable, the mechanisms that Apple gives us to enforce these updates on Apple Silicon is a bad workflow. It's just, it's like, it doesn't work for anyone. The administrators don't like it. The users don't like it. I don't understand how Apple thinks it's a good user experience. It's literally a terrible user experience. Either the user ignores the notifications because Apple does such a good job of making new ways to ignore them. Through either bad UI,
focus
on
modes,
macOS, the UI is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Or I mean, like literally, they went from Do Not Disturb to this whole focus engine. Now it's like, oh, here's a half dozen customizable ways for you to ignore the alerts to update your Mac. So even by design, that's bad. And then on top of that, when you do the MDM push, if you're trying to enforce it, the computer just freaking restarts. It's like a message restart, and like that's a terrible user experience too. So I mean, the real problem is that just we don't have a good workflow. Nobody likes it. I don't know who likes it. Maybe somebody Apple likes it. I don't think anybody likes it. And so
and Apple's always said that they're all about the end user. And so for a person, like if this is just your personal computer, it's not, I don't know. This is the one place when it comes to like running an app, fine. But when it comes to managing a system, no, absolutely not.
Well, I mean, there is that, I think, obviously I used to work at Apple. If you ever worked at Apple, you know that like internally there's really no IT infrastructure on your device. So it's like, how do you update? You freaking run software update, right? Like I would imagine the vast majority of people are like just running software update, and internally to Apple, that's like, how do you update an enterprise? Well, you use software update. I mean, we're an enterprise. We're the most richest company in the world. Yet somehow we just use software update. Well, that's because Apple can fire bad employees.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you're a bad employee, Apple just gets rid of you. Other organizations don't have that, or other organizations are literally government run agencies that have mandates where you don't have a choice about the update schedule. And also I have had some customers who have been told by their insurance carriers that they will not be underwritten unless they can get everybody updated within 3 days. 3 days.
Wow.
And they won't even be covered by their insurance company anymore. So, I mean, these are real problems to solve. And Apple's consumer-focused sort of methodologies just don't cut it for an organization that requires updates in a timely manner. And of course, we don't want to bother the users. Or if we do bother them, we want to give them opportunities to defer it till later. And then once you start going down that road, then you want to do things like, hey, I'm in the middle of a Zoom right now. It would really suck if a notification appeared. Right? So we obviously want to work around that. And then, we need to have deadlines. And so initially it just came as, hey, we need to actually have deadlines here. And we don't want to just cut the user off. We want to actually give them actionable dialog boxes that we can customize. And I want, different deferment options and different deadline options. So that was the initial sort of idea and the genesis of Super. And then what's happened, of course, is that as I got deeper into this, I realized sort of how unreliable the update mechanism is. When you do tell it to go, sometimes you tell it to go and it's just like meh, or it goes and then it crashes, or there's basically the software update process is incredibly complex. There's a lot of things not only going on locally on the computer, it's making connections back to Apple to validate things. It is, there's a lot of steps that have to go on. And then on top of that, the MDM workflow adds a whole nother layer of complexity before the system even starts to update. And so and it's also a black box, like you send an MDM push and you kind of don't know when it's going to arrive.
Right.
And so you start having to have code to watch that process and watch these processes. In fact, the biggest difference from Super 2, which I introduced last year, and Super 3 is Super 3 assumes everything's going to break. And it has to watch it all and do something about it when it breaks. So, you talked about the length of the script. 3/4 of it's just waiting for shit to break. That's really what it is. Like, what do you do? Okay, this didn't happen. Now what do I do? This didn't happen. Now what I do?
I know you're working with. I know you're working with Hugo to help us with implementing it with one. And I know that there was some long discussions about the amount of timeout to put in there, because it's just like, wait a little bit longer, see if it's going to break yet.
Yeah. And that's one of the hard things for me to gauge too, because I only have so many different test systems to work with. And I can make timings that I think are reasonable. And then it's like, okay, it took my computer 5 minutes. I'm going to double it, make it 10, because I have a MacBook Pro MX. I have my own gigabit connection. I'm assuming a best case scenario. So let's double that timing. But then, people's computers still do different things, and I can't test for every single combination of every computer on earth. And certainly not whatever your network's going to do. And so, that becomes complex, right? As you add more features and you add more robustness to the process, your script gets longer and longer. I mean, even if you just start scripting, you want to do one line, right? I want to do one thing. It's just a one-line script. But then you start actually adding all the robustness that you need into that one line, and you end up with, I just want to run, it's 1% do something, 99% make sure that when you do the thing, it's going to do the right thing.
Right. Right.
And so
error
that's why
checking and validation. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's why the script ends up just ballooning out of. It's not just features I want to add. It's ballooning out of control, so that because this process is so complicated and people have so many different workflows that they want to have. In fact, something that was a really big deal to add, but it became necessary, is the MDM mechanism was just breaking. I would send the command and the Mac would just go whatever. And so one of my customers, who was actually, it was good that I had this because it was a Jamf customer and we were using my time to develop this, is a failover mechanism for when MDM fails, we're just going to prompt the user for their password. Because if MDM isn't going to work, it's going to continue not to work. If it fails once, it's, you can't just keep yelling at a computer over MDM, do it again, do it again, do it again. It's just probably not going to go. And so there's so one of the things I implemented earlier this year was a failover mechanism, or an option to say, hey, if MDM fails, just prompt the user for their password, because at this point we got to get this computer updated, and we might as well ask them for their password to try to get it done. Right.
I saw at your JNUX session. I don't want to taint the answer to this question because I suspect I know it, but I wanted to ask, what feature or aspect of this script has been your biggest challenge? What you talked about how things balloon, but what was the biggest little either scope creep or trick that came into this where you're like, oh, this should be pretty easy, and then it turned out to be a nightmare?
I'd never assume anything's going to be easy. But the biggest change from 2 to 3, aside from the assumption that everything's going to break, is to support upgrades also, right? Updates and upgrades. And I wanted to make that as sort of built in as possible, to where the administrator using it doesn't have to think about where it's, because here's the thing about macOS, it's complicated. The version of the OS you're starting with, the authentication mechanism that you're going to use. Oh yeah, obviously Intel versus Apple Silicon. Like there are like 8 different ways you might end up updating a system. Or I'm sorry, upgrading a system, but depending on the workflows. And so finding all of those things and knowing which path to take is a bunch of logic. Here's a quick example. If you're running 12.3 or later, Apple has this new, they call it like the Delta upgrade, where it actually leverages software updates updater to upgrade you without the installer. And that's pretty sweet because it's really, it is really fast. Like when it works, it's like you can start the process, download, prepare, and restart. And on like an Apple Silicon Mac, it literally takes 10 minutes to go from 12.3 to 13, whatever. That's awesome. But if you send, but that only works if you're using local authentication. If you're using an MDM push, you can't do that. You have to go download the whole installer because the MDM push in macOS 12 doesn't know how to do those Delta updates yet or upgrades yet. And so that's just the kind of stuff you have to discover and experiment with and figure out the hard way so that when somebody's using Super, doesn't have to think about that. And I've been using Super just to say, Super, go upgrade my fleet. And then Super knows the right thing to do based on the version of macOS that you're currently running.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of, there's a ton of logic in that.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of my bigger takeaways from that was just seeing at that presentation was seeing how much, depending on architecture and version, what had to go. One of the notes, this was one of my favorite quotes, and I had to write this down. One of my favorite quotes from that presentation you wrote, I'll probably just grab erase install and shove it amoeba style into Super. Is that what ended up happening?
For the download of a full installer, if Super's detection is I have to download the installer, I do leverage erase install for that because Graham's script is great. It has a lot of built-in stuff to validate the installers the right well, first of all, it helps me figure out which one to download, right? Because it goes and scrapes it all and lets us know, hey, this version's valid for this logic board, right? Because even that alone is a really hard problem. Like I'm on a what kind of Mac now, and I have to know which one to download because software update doesn't expose that complexity. When you ask software update for a list, it gives you the list for just that computer. But when you're trying to figure out which installer to download, like that's complex logic. And so that's something erase install does for me that I don't have to think about. I just ask it, give me the latest that's compatible and let's go.
I'm stealing a question from the chat so I can get to that in a little bit. I want to make sure to get to that one.
And also full disclosure about why I'm not using something more contemporary like Mist. It's because Mist only supports macOS 11 or later. And if we're going to be updating macOS 10 computers, we have to use something that goes back further.
Yeah, and that's also the other joy is anything. The entire post OS 10 world has created every single version has created its own new challenges.
Yeah, that's also why the dialog boxes created by Super are based on IBM Notifier. Yeah, it's because IBM Notifier supports back to 10.15, whereas Swift Dialog does not. Swift Dialog, I think that only goes to 11
something. Yeah, right. Yeah. In fact, we've been looking to move because Dep Notify hasn't been updated in forever. Looking to, even though Swift Dialog doesn't have every feature I want yet, and I've got a couple of feature requests in there, the fact that it's being actively maintained and is great. But the fact that it doesn't go all the way back to some of our clients' OSs makes that a bit of a challenge. I wanted to ask, and we've alluded to this, but I wanted to see if you had any particular hard numbers. Yeah, thank you, Todd, Coco Dialog. In a typical environment of several thousand computers, so think about some of your bigger clients, mix of architecture, but dialing in within the last couple of OSs. So let's say post OS 10, what would you expect to see in terms of success rate? Like, because we've been having very mixed results, and I don't want to big honking text, Bruce, you're funny. But I wanted to, what kind of things have you been seeing when you deploy? I mean, it's your tool. So if anybody's going to have the best success rate for it, it's going to be you. What kind of success rate have you been saying of, all right, we're going to send this out and get everybody up to date?
So that's a great question because it's actually the customer who is the original customer who inspired /paid Jamf to pay me to help them create this. So first of all, if you have a large Jamf fleet, what percentage of your Jamf devices are even checking in? right?
Yeah,
So
that's always a fun part.
What's your
right?
100%? You have to first start with, well, what's 100% mean? Are we
Mhm.
talking about 100% of active Macs or 100% of
Yeah.
just Macs in general?
I was
Okay,
assuming
so-
computers that are
well,
actually
that's what I'm
hitting those
trying to get
recurring
at.
check-ins. Yeah.
Yeah,
mhm.
that's what I'm trying. Well, I can only give you the number that they have given me for their entire fleet. So
Okay,
I don't know
okay.
what percentage of this is computers that are like idle, you know.
Yeah.
And this is a customer with thousands of Macs, to be clear. They are just under 80%, like 13.3.1.
Okay. That's
So-
still better numbers than we've been having, because what we seem to be hitting is this is going to taint one of my upcoming questions, but I don't care. It seems to be a lot of the MDM. It's like you send out the command, nothing happens, and then you go and you take a look, and is the computer even receiving MDM? Does it have dozens of MDM commands? But yeah, it's the number I was given for the last push was some of our last push to get a client up to date was less than 50%. Everything else is still sitting back. Have you heard numbers like that? Or is that an indicator that we need to be doing something differently?
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely numbers that can be low for sure. And the problem is, and this is something I know because it's a function of Super, is to watch the MDM commands when it's expecting for the update or upgrade to happen. And then to react when those commands literally don't show up in a timely fashion. Because if we're using Jamf, the workflow is you say push an update, and this all assumes the computer's paying attention, and I'm awake and good. Jamf sends out a command that says, go check for updates, computer. And then Jamf gives the computer 5 minutes. And then 5 minutes later, Jamf sends a command saying, what updates do you have? If that gets returned back to Jamf, Jamf evaluates that, and then sends down the command to actually try to do it. Sends down the command to go update. Super watches that to make sure that it happens. And I don't remember what the timeout is, but I have a timeout in there that basically says, hey, if you haven't gotten this command in like 10 minutes, just go ahead and assume it's failed. And then we'll try later, or depending on your options, ask the user for authentication. But I will tell you that I've recently found out, like literally this week, as I was testing the mechanism to update rapid security responses, a little birdie at Jamf told me about something that I did not know could happen. And that something is an invalid bootstrap token. The mechanisms that we have used to see if the computer has a bootstrap token, and I should clarify, you need a bootstrap token to push the MDM command to update the computer.
Right.
On Apple Silicon. It's a requirement. That's how it does it without the password. Literally, Apple Silicon has a rule. You have to authenticate updates. Okay, there's 2 ways to do this: a password of a volume owner, so like the local user, or the bootstrap token. So obviously your MDM uses this bootstrap token, because it doesn't know the user's passwords, to send that command and validate and make the computer restart. So Jamf has always historically, done its job and escrowed that bootstrap token. It saves it in the database. And you can look in your Jamf inventory. Is the bootstrap token escrowed? You can run a command on your Mac, the profiles command. You can say, is my bootstrap token escrowed? Super already did this. But then a little birdie said, just because the bootstrap token is escrowed doesn't mean it's valid. That just means at some point in the past, one was stored there. He said, run this command locally on the computer, and it will tell you if your bootstrap token is valid or not. And that was a revelation to me, because one of the ways that the MDM profile can fail is that it gets pushed, but there's the bootstrap token that Jamf pushes isn't the right bootstrap token.
Jacob
so
asked
it just
the
doesn't
question.
go. And
Jacob in the chat asked the question I want to know. Do you know off the top of your head what that command is to query that?
Okay, well, here's the real part. It's 13.3 or later only. So you literally, the command, now I'm sure that there is a server-side solution to this, where you could probably send out an MDM push to ask if it's valid and try to do a new one. But the command, and by the way, if you want to know the command, it's an MDM client. It's when you run the MDM client command locally to find the device information. It can tell you, what it actually tells you is you can actually send the erase all contents push. That's literally what the test is. It says, it basically does a bunch of checking to see if the MDM can send the erase all content push. So it actually has nothing to do with software update, but it does validate. And by the way, again, 13.3 or later only. I don't know the line off the top of my head. If you go look at the latest builds of Super, it's in there in the check bootstrap token function. So it's buried in there. But it only works on 13.3 or later. So prior to 13.3, I have no idea how to see if your bootstrap token's valid.
Joy.
But obviously the newest versions of Super do this if you're on 13.3 or later. Like you want to know where a couple of those 100 lines of code just added was? 13.3 or later, go do this check now because I know you can. And so, but another cool thing though that Super does, even on older OSs, is if the MDM failover happens and we ask for the user's password, guess what I can use that password for in addition to running the update?
What's that?
Fix your bootstrap token.
It's the bootstrap token. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So basically,
because I know,
yeah.
You had said during the at the meetup, I don't remember what the context was, but it caused my ears to perk up because I'd never thought of it. That in the situation where MDM wasn't working, I think is where you would query the user for something. I don't remember how it came up, but you were using the keychain to store a local an admin account.
That is the option if you don't want to use MDM. So that
right.
Super also has a workflow that's MDM less. And that workflow, well, there's a couple things it can do. If you don't have an MDM, so even if you're not using Jamf, the default Super behavior, if you don't have an MDM, is just prompt the user for their password. Actually, it does some checks first to see if you have because here's the thing about Apple Silicon, you have to be a volume owner. You don't have to be an admin, but you do have to be a volume owner. So it does that check first to make sure that you can authenticate as a volume owner. And then it asks you for your password, and it does, and it uses its own dialogue. So this is not a dialogue that's a system dialogue. This is a Super dialogue. So you can customize it or whatever. And actually, you could just use Super that way. If you wanted to use Super without an MDM, it totally works. In fact, my idea there was, I want to do what Nudge does, only without Apple's interfaces. Because Apple's interfaces are inconsistent.
Yes.
What version of Mac do you have? Which button do you push? Is it already downloaded or not? Do you have the update now or upgrade now button or the later link at the bottom? Like, it's just, even that interface is not good. And between different versions, you never know what to tell your end users. Which button do you press? Like, that's a simple question. Apple, what button do I tell my 1,000 fleet of Mac users to press across different versions of OS to actually do the update? And you have to build an if-then tree just to answer that question.
Right. Yeah.
So I said, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to make one dialog box that's going to authenticate everything.
Well, okay. On that line, because one of the questions I received in advance was wondering if, do you intend to add customization to the text fields for the pop-up notifications the end users interact with?
Let me answer that question in a second. I'm looking at the chat and somebody's saying the bootstrap token in the chat. No, that profiles command bootstrap token is the current method to tell you if at some point in history it was escrowed. Being escrowed is not being valid. Thank you, Jason. Jason put the right one in.
Oh, okay.
So Jason,
and that's nice and easy to remember. Yeah.
That also has a bunch of grepping and setting in it to actually just return the value instead of the whole thing, because Apple does everything now with what is it called, JSON. And so that you get a JSON return, and the rest of that line sorts it out to not JSON.
Yeah, I love the fact that we've got one of the few Unixes that doesn't have a built-in JSON tool, and yet now all of a sudden we're going to JSON. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the format, and I'm glad we're doing it. I just wish we had like JQ or something built in.
Yeah, in fact, I'm thinking for the next version of Super, I'm going to download JQ.
There you go.
So I don't have to do so much setting bashing on. Anyhow, I'm sorry. Back to your actual question. Can you customize the Jamf? I'm sorry.
No, the question was whether or not. The question was whether you were thinking about whether or not you were planning on adding customization to it.
Well, it's actually already customizable.
Okay.
There's a couple things that are built in via options. The simple one is just change the icon, so you can brand it for you. That's already a flag and options. Because it's built on IBM Notifier, there's also a display accessory function that can draw a window with your arbitrary contents of choice there. So that's already options built into Super. However, the main text of Super, the what version am I doing, and then what's the deferral time, that's all based on calculations of like what kind of deferrals and deadlines you gave Super. So that part is sort of hard coded into the script, except there is a function inside of Super called set display language that has variables just right there in a huge list of every single thing Super could generate. And so although it is hard-coded built into the script right now, if you wanted to localize it, you just look in that function and go down the list and just change all the words to whatever you want them to say. And that's why if you go look at that function right now, you'll notice that function alone is like 150 lines long of different things it can do. That's how many different variations are there. That's the problem. It's like, what if you have deadlines? What if you don't have deadlines? What if they're expired? What if you're doing an upgrade? It's like, that's again, 8,000 lines of code. This is what it comes to when you want a feature like this. So going forward though, so in other words, right now you have to mess around with the script, but there is features there for you. Looking forward, I am actually going to replace IBM Notifier with probably with Swift dialogue. And then when I do that, I will come up with some other method a la nudge, probably taking inspiration from them, where they have sort of like a defined file that, you know, that you can set them for different languages and whatnot. So it is customizable right now, and it could be better, and I'm aware of that.
Okay. Yeah, I know that you're pulling information in from local plist, from managed plist, as well as from the Jamf policy command lines. So you're pulling information from a lot of places. So I didn't know where to go with that. I have one last question.
Just to clarify, if you want to change any of the strings that Super creates for itself, you have to modify the script. But the icon and the arbitrary window that it can draw of just whatever you want to in there, you don't even have to get into the script for that. That's all just options in the command line of the plist.
Okay, cool. Then I probably just looked right past it. I get dense at times with that.
Well,
I did
also just one more thing about that.
Yeah,
the documentation is way out of date. The wiki is out of date. It doesn't have any of this stuff. So I'm basically giving you a pass, Chad, for not knowing that it can do all this. Because right now, the only documentation that is relevant is the changelog. Because I've just been putting out so many builds with so many, it's like the changelog has everything in it. And also just for the audience, like, don't look at the wiki right now. I mean, you can, it's some of the commands are still there, but the changelog is where all these newer features are in Super 3.0, because the wiki is basically versioned at 2.0 right now.
Yeah, that was kind of my gist as well. In fact, one of the questions I was going to ask in here was, for Jamf admin who was just picking up for the first time, what would you consider to be best practice for implementing? Because looking at the document, I know that like when in the wiki, when you talk about it's like getting started, it's like just running it from the command line, putting it into test mode, and would you consider for that, sometime in all of your surplus time, putting together like here's the most straightforward basic implementation to hopefully get you past that 50% closer to 80% number, and then let the rest of the tweaks go?
It's about time, right? Like I can either add new features to Super and implement bug fixes, or I can make documentation, and that's why the wiki's out of date.
Yeah. And maybe that's a place for video, right? Just ramble to a camera.
No, I want to document. My timeline is as such. I've been waiting for rapid security responses, because that's kind of what I was like. Version 3 is done when rapid security responses are out, and so this week that happened. And so at this point, I'm kind of considering version 3 as feature complete. I'm gonna fixing bugs is one thing, but adding more features, I'm done for now for 3. Now I can transition to wrapping up, polishing up version 3, writing the wiki so that there is documentation that is good. And then my goal is basically that page. If you're a Jamf administrator, like what to do in Jamf, is going to be very clear. Like if you want to do this via Jamf, XYZ.
Okay, perfect.
Because most of the wiki is describing all the features, and I'm very well aware of this, because a lot of Jamf's documentation is here's what every feature does, but they don't tell you like here's the recipe. And I'm aware of that. The reality is it's much easier to create document. If your goal is to be thorough, you have to document every feature, and that's kind of step 1, like the baseline. I have to document what everything does so that it's clear what the feature does, and there's a bunch of features in Super. And then step 2 is, okay, make like your recipe for what is kind of the best case or best use of Super in a Jamf environment. And it's pretty simple. If you have basic needs, you just make a policy with the superscript and a couple options in the parameters, and you can be done. It's everybody sees all these features and they get excited and they're like, I got to throw everything in. And then, and it's kind of like when you're making a meal, like just because you threw everything in the pot doesn't mean it's going to taste good. Like,
Yeah.
Start with base. And so my basic general advice about Super is getting started intentionally doesn't turn on any features. Like start there with test mode, see how it works, add things as you need them. Don't throw everything in. I see too many people that are literally like, they take the XML that's like all the
Hard
features
count and all that. Yeah.
put it in Jamf and go, well, that must be the right way to do it. No, that's like every feature ever. That's like turning on every switch in Word. You don't do that. Like, so start with as few features as possible, adding only the ones necessary.
My last and very brief answer, because I saw Chris come back on camera, so I know he wants to do the final announcement. But I did want to ask the last question I put in here. What, if anything, can this group do to help? I know you've got a lot of people who are, I mean, this is a great, big, large group of people that came together because they love, because like you said, Apple and made this a nightmare and you've made it less nightmarish. Is there anything we can do to help you?
Well, obviously testing and providing feedback on the Slack channel, and even obviously just being involved in the Slack, Mac Admin Slack channel is a huge help. But if you are going to test and you don't know why it's working, can you please RTFL? Read the freaking log, people. I cannot tell you how many answers like, did you read the log? And I pride myself on my log creation because I spent, again, where all those thousands of lines, freaking logs, people. I make it so you can read them in English. Sorry if you don't speak English. I can't tell you how many of the stuff ends up in the channel. I'm like, well, in the log, it says this. So there you go. So just please take a couple minutes to read through the log. It is not like other people who don't know how to make logs for humans. They basically make a log.
I don't know who you're talking about. Yeah.
I mean, a good example is the Jamf log is a great local log on the computer because at least it tells you what it's doing in pretty good English.
Yep.
So I kind of modeled it after that. I'm like, what the hell is it doing right now? Oh, here's pretty clear English what it's doing right now. And obviously it's not perfect, but just please, in fact, one of the problems I have with Super now is the logs are getting too big. That's a thing I got to fix in the next version is to cycle through those things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, I will thank you very much for coming in. This has helped me out a lot, but and this is like a more, I know you were doing more, JNUC kind of forced us to be in more presentation mode, give information. So I love the fact that we were able to do a lot more questions and learn more about it. Thank you, Sue, for coming. Sure. I should probably with that turn around and hand this back to Chris.
Cool. Can you spotlight me, Chad?
I cannot. I don't know. Let's see if I can.
I made you host, Chad, earlier.
All right. And now let me remove my own spotlight or replace spotlight. There we go.
Thanks so much. And thank you, Kevin, for joining us for this meetup. You have been a rock star in this community since I started using Jamf. So it's such a pleasure to have you on the call with us. I wanted to make one announcement because we did that survey at the beginning, and I want to explain why we did that. So because we're starting a podcast, and I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and one of my favorite ones is Command Control Power. And they have a fun line at the beginning that says they're drawing from over half a century of combined experience. So I kind of wanted to see, well, what are we drawing from on this meetup of obviously a lot more people? So the number we got was 590 years of combined experience. So now it's official. I'm sticking to it. We are going to say from now on that we are drawing from over half a millennia of combined experience on this meetup. So thanks everyone for participating in that survey. So I could say this funny little thing. Yeah, we'll do another poll in the future. I'm shooting for a full millennia next time. We'll see what we can do. But yeah, we're right at the end of our time, so I want to thank everyone so much for joining. We do this every month as if this is your first time joining. So go ahead and look at our website. You can also join the Mac Admin Slack channel. I'll post the link to our website, this specific page in there. I think that should work. And then lastly, if anyone does have the 20 years of Jamf experience, please let us know. We have a $50 Jamf swag code to send you. If we don't hear from anyone, I guess we'll figure that out. Maybe throw it in there if you think you had the next highest number. With that, we are Rocket.Man Tech. This is our monthly meetup. Eric usually does the closing statements, so I never really know how to end meetings. So I'll probably end up going into a Midwest goodbye if I talk too long. But happy Friday, happy Cinco de Mayo,
Happy
everyone.
Cinco de Mayo, yeah.
Yeah. And have a great rest of your day. We'll stay on for a couple more minutes here. Can you unspotlight me, Chad, so I don't feel awkward?
I can try.
Thank you, everybody.
Move. There. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Thank you all. Happy Kentucky Derby. Cool.
Hey, good to see you, Michael. I don't know if he's responding. Corgi Michael. I got a thumbs up.
Yep.
Old friend from Ultimate Frisbee that I learned is also a Jamf admin, which is pretty cool.
A lot of discussion about mint juleps going on because of the Kentucky Derby. That's awesome.
Quick question, if you guys have a minute left. I popped a question in the chat.
Yep.
I'll repost it. Basically, I pushed out updates through Jamf MDM, and it upgraded several of the computers to Ventura, which is currently broken with several of our applications. So we're having to erase and downgrade computers. But some of the computers are still in their 7-time deferral phase. Is there any way to stop an update after it's been deployed through MDM and is like pending user deferrals?
I'm watching Kevin's brain shift in there.
I actually don't know because I never send that MDM command. The MDM commands that Super sends are all the do it now, because MDM is handling all that deferral nonsense that Apple tries to do. So I actually don't know how to stop it, because I imagine the way it works, because the way it works, MDM works, is Jamf just sends one ultimate command in the end. It's like, hey, it's time to update. But within that command is settings of like when to do it. Like, do you want to let them have deferrals? Are we doing upgrades or not? And then Jamf is sort of out. So I don't know if there's definitely not a way on Jamf to do it, because at that point, Jamf has sent the command and the computer has accepted it.
Yeah, I opened a ticket with Jamf and that was their response. And I contacted our Apple enterprise person and they were like, yeah, I don't know. Do you have an enterprise contract?
I mean, one thing you might want to do, which might work, is send the command to kill the software, what's it called, software update D. Just because software update D is the background process that's actually going to do the job. And it might, I don't know if it caches that setting, that deferment mechanism, or if it like writes to a plist somewhere. But if it's just like cached in RAM and you kill the process, it might, on restart, it might forget that it's supposed to be doing this, and then just kind of go back to its normal sort of semi-idle state of like, not trying to update the OS. That's the only thing otherwise, knowing where that setting gets stored, it's a black box in there. I have no idea where the heck Apple puts anything in there.
Yeah, one thing I found is one user let me know that they still had deferrals popping up, and I was able to go in and manually run the Monterey update, and then it stopped trying to do the Ventura upgrade. But I don't know if there's other users that still have deferrals pending that haven't let me know. And yeah, it's just, it's horrible. I'm definitely going to look into Super, because this MDM updating has been a nightmare.
Well, so you gave me a clue there. Maybe the act of running like a software update list and then like downloading a different update, like instead of like having the installer download, it downloads the update, like that resets something on Apple's back end inside the computer to say, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. Somebody's asked for this other thing to happen. So actually, yeah, just running Super with default settings, because default settings in Super are don't upgrade. But what it will do is it will query to run updates, and it will download the latest update, which could reset those deferrals. Because again, something's told software update you need to do something else. That might work.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I've been in a couple other meetings and posed this question, and nobody had thought of anything. So I appreciate this, and I really
600 years experience. We're going to give it a shot here. Yeah. Gwen,
I'm
I'm really glad you
12,
stuck around and asked, because I copied your question down and then we were running out of time and I didn't get to it. So I'm really glad you asked. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate the meetings each month. It's good to have lots of Mac knowledge. All right.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Excellent.
I'll second what she said. These meetings are fantastic. And Kevin, you're my hero. I'm so excited to get Super rolled out everywhere. I've been testing it in a room. I'm in my home office right now, just surrounded by Macs. The amount of radiation is ridiculous right now. But I had a quick question for you, if you still have time. And I promise I am going to look at the logs, but I just did this test during the meeting. Haven't had a chance to look at the logs yet. But yesterday I hit a bunch of these Macs with Super. Bunch of them worked great. 3 of them didn't, but it was the RSR, and it was one of them had that other issue that you fixed in 12 with the you've got 0 gigabytes storage available. I upgraded to 12 during this call, and all of them worked now. But the one that had the 0 gig available, it didn't get the deferral prompt to, hey, restart, whatever. It immediately restarted. And I was wondering if you think maybe, I'm going to look at the logs, but I was wondering if you think maybe that's just because it was in that state of it's confused. It should have restarted, but it thinks it has 0 gigs. And as soon as I fixed it with Super, maybe it just proceeded.
Actually, I have a question for you. Is that computer in like Germany or another country?
No, but it is an ancient Mac Mini. I want to say it's a 2014 or something.
Okay. So the comma thing comes up when the system language is not American, and they put commas in file sizes. Like in English America, we don't put comma. When you ask the system how big is the update, it's just like, it's this many megabytes or gigabyte, whatever it is, but it doesn't have any commas in it. But if your system language is set to like German or, I don't know, other countries, it throws commas in there, and that confuses Super because it didn't know that commas could happen. And I thought I had fixed that problem, but actually somebody submitted this morning that it doesn't. And it's totally stupid. I take the commas out and then I run another bash command to do some math on it. The result of that puts the commas back in. But only if you're in another country, which of course I did not know because my system language is set to America English. And so I'm still having problems with freaking commas in the file size thing. So yeah, I'm aware that might have been still the same problem. I'm literally just gonna have to spin up a Mac and like put it into another country to actually solve this. So yeah,
I mean, it's entirely possible I had the localized settings wrong on that one. I set that one up a long time ago, but it did work. I mean, it granted it rebooted without warning me, but it came back up on the right OS. So
yeah, whenever you reinstall Super, I always do a -- reset Super in there to clear out any cache that Super might have, especially between versions, because between versions things change and there could be something bad in the P list that was there earlier.
Yeah, the reset Super was in there.
Okay, well, yeah, it could. I don't know, man. It's probably just a bug.
I'm
yeah, but you check the log file.
Thanks a lot.
Cool. Looks like questions and people are dropping off, so this might be a good time to do the official end of the meeting. So thanks again, Kevin. It's been a pleasure having you. And everyone else, have a great rest of your Friday and have a good weekend.